Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to the 27th lecture of this massive open online course on Sociology of Development. As you know, we are in the 11th week of this massive open online course on Sociology of Development. We have completed limits to growth thesis in terms of 2 lectures, and today we are going to discuss E.F. Schmacher's, Ernst Friedrich Schmacher's Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered. I mean, as we have discussed modernization theory and its critics, dependency theory and its critics, and then we have moved on to Meadows and her colleagues' reflections on the limits to growth thesis, as we have discussed in limits to growth, a report for the Club of Rome's project on the predicament of mankind. How 5 variables were examined in the original model on the assumptions that exponential growth accurately described their patterns of increase, and that the ability of technology to increase the availability of resources only linearly. And those 5 variables that we examined included world population, industrialization, pollution, food production and resource depletion, consumption of non-renewable natural resources. And we have also discussed exponential reserve index, commodity reserve extrapolation, and what kind of conclusions that the authors of LTG derived, and what were the behavior modes, which refer to the tendencies of the variables in the system. Those variables may be pollution, may be population, may be food production, may be resource depletion, may be industrialization and so on, to change as time progresses, right? And we have discussed resource consumption, we have discussed trade-offs between present benefits on the one hand and future benefits on the other, resource costs, depletion of the earth's non-renewable resources, natural ecological systems, pollution. When I say, future state of ecological systems, energy consumption and gross national product per capita. We have also discussed exponentially increasing pollution. The criticisms also we have discussed of the LTG thesis. And now we are going to look at Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered, by Ernst Friedrich Schmacher. This phrase, small is beautiful, was borrowed by Schmacher from his teacher Leopold Kohr. This term, this phrase, small is beautiful, is often used to champion small, appropriate technologies which are believed to empower people more, in contrast with phrases such as bigger is better. Okay? That people used to say that no, industrialization will result in more employment, more output, more technology and so on. On the contrary, Schmacher, by taking the cue from Buddhist economics, by taking the cue from Gandhian philosophy and so on, he tried to locate small is beautiful to champion small appropriate technologies that are believed to empower people more. Okay? And the way technology has reduced human beings into machines, the way industrialization has reduced human beings into machines. You can look at, you can watch Modern Times by Charlie Chaplin, where human beings are reduced to machines. That's what I mean, it doesn't empower people, right? I mean, huge machines, assembly line production, it doesn't empower people, okay? Rather, all small appropriate technologies, they try to empower people more, because they can accommodate even the de-skilled, even the less skillful workers. And that's how Schmacher tried to bring about a critique of Western economics. He opposed neoclassical economics by declaring that single-minded concentration on output and technology was dehumanizing. He held that one's workplace should be dignified and meaningful first, efficient second, and that nature and the world's natural resources, they are priceless. That's why he proposed the idea of smallness within bigness, a specific form of decentralization. I mean, why he suggested that one's workplace must be dignified and meaningful first, efficient second, and nature is priceless, or world's natural resources are priceless, precisely because for a large organization to work, it must behave like a related group of small organizations. Okay? And in this sense, Schmacher's work coincided with the growth of ecological concerns and with the birth of environmentalism, environment protection and sustainable development, and so on. Okay? And in this context, we are going to discuss Schmacher's reflections on the problem of production. Schmacher argues that modern economy is unsustainable. How? One of the what Schmacher argues that one of the most fateful errors of our age, of our industrial age, is the belief that the problem of production has been solved. Not only is this belief firmly held by people remote from production and therefore professionally unacquainted with the facts, it is held by virtually all the experts, the captains of industry, the economic managers in the governments of the world, the academic and not so academic economists, not to mention the economic journalists. They may disagree on many things, that they all agree that the problem of production has been solved. They say that mankind has at last come of age. For the rich countries, what is argued, that the most important task is now education for leisure, okay, and for the poor countries, it is the transfer of technology. If I said that modern industrial system, modern economy is unsustainable, and that's why the conventional economists, they argue that for rich countries, or for developed countries, education for leisure, and for poor countries or for less developed countries, it is the transfer of technology. Okay. Perhaps what you find in this kind of reflection, that Schmacher was not simply trying to bring about a critique of Marx on the one hand, and also a critique of John Maynard Keynes on the other. Okay? How Marx, because of labor theory of value. Okay, he was trying to bring about a critique we are going to discuss. And Keynes, precisely because for Keynes there is nothing called supply side economics. We all live in demand side economics. Okay, as if supply side economics, I mean the problems of supply side economics are solved today. Okay, that's why when I say supply side economics, I mean the production side, right? Okay, and when I say demand side, I mean it is consumption side. We all live in consumption side economy. That's what Keynes argued. Schmacher tried to bring about a critique of such argument by Keynes that no, even our supply side economics problems are not yet solved. Okay, that things are not going as well as they ought to be growing must be due to human wickedness, as Schmacher argued. We must therefore construct a political system so perfect that human wickedness disappears and everybody behaves well, no matter how much wickedness there may be in her or him. In fact, it is widely held that everybody is born good, but if one turns into a criminal or an exploiter, this is the fault of the system. No doubt the system is in many ways bad and must be changed. One of the main reasons why it is bad and why it can still survive in spite of its badness, it is erroneous, is this erroneous view that the problem of production has been solved. As this error pervades all present day systems, there is at present not much to choose between them. The arising of this error, so egregious and so firmly rooted, is closely connected with the philosophical, not to say religious changes during the last 3-4 centuries in human beings' attitude towards nature. And that's why from the very beginning we have discussed that what is the relationship between nature on the one hand and human beings on the other, precisely because if you look at the literature suggests that nature controls, and human beings, that's why used to worship nature, used to contemplate on nature for their survival. Okay, but with the emergence of scientific temper, with the changes in the modes of production, with the rise in intellectual and political consciousness, critical thinking, rationality, reasoning capacity, industrialization, and so on, what we have noticed that human beings not only contemplate on nature, but also know how to master over nature, but also know how to control nature. That's why there has been a transition from faculty of contemplation to faculty of control so far as the relationship between human beings and nature is concerned. Okay, that's why Schmacher argues here that Western individuals' attitude to nature, but since the whole world is now in a process of westernization, I mean industrialization, modernity, large scale production, assembly line production, and so on, the more generalized statement appears to be justified. Modern individual does not experience himself or herself as a part of nature, but as an outside force destined to dominate and conquer it. That's why the way we say that no, human beings are essentially a part of nature, okay, that is getting eroded today because of the indiscriminate control over nature. Okay, and today human beings, human species even talk of a battle with nature, forgetting that if they won the battle, they would find themselves on the losing side. Until quite recently, the battle seemed to go well enough to give them the illusion of unlimited powers, but not so well as to bring the possibility of total victory into view. This has now come into views, and many people, albeit only a minority, are beginning to realize what this implies for the continued existence of humanity. And the illusion of unlimited powers nourished by astonishing scientific and technological achievements has produced the concurrent illusion of having solved the problem of production. And the latter illusion is based on the failure to distinguish between income and capital, where this distinction matters most. Okay? People very often think that natural resources they constitute income, but actually they are capital, right? Okay. And every economist and businessman is familiar with such distinction between income and capital and applies it conscientiously and with considerable subtlety to all economic affairs, except where it really matters, namely the irreplaceable capital which human beings have not made but simply found, and without which they can do nothing. Okay? For example, a businessman would not consider a farm to have solved the problems of production and to have achieved viability if they saw that it was rapidly consuming its capital. How then could we overlook this vital fact when it comes to that very big farm, the economy of spaceship Earth, and in particular the economies of its rich passengers? And that's how he was trying to bring about a critique of Marx here, that one reason for overlooking this vital fact is that we are estranged from reality and inclined to treat as valueless everything that we have not made ourselves. That's how he while bringing about a critique of Marx, he pointed out that how Marx fell into this devastating error when he formulated the so-called labor theory of value. Now we have indeed labored to make some of the capital which today helps us produce a large fund of scientific, technological and other knowledge, an elaborate physical infrastructure, innumerable types of sophisticated capital equipment and so on. But all this is but a small part of the total capital that we are using. And for larger is the capital provided by nature and not by human beings, and we do not even recognize it as such. This larger part is now being used up at an alarming rate, and that is why it is an absurd and suicidal error to believe and act on the belief that the problem of production has been solved. Then Schmacher was trying to look at natural capital. Okay, for example, natural resources like fossil fuels are treated as expendable income, when in fact they should be treated as capital, since they are not renewable and thus subject to eventual depletion. Okay. First of all and most obviously, there are fossil fuels so far as natural capital is concerned. No one would deny that we are treating them as income items, although they are undeniably capital items. If we treated them as capital items, we should be concerned with conservation. Okay? We should do everything in our power to try and minimize their current rate of use. We might be saying, for instance, that the money obtained from the realization of these assets, these irreplaceable assets, must be placed into a special fund to be devoted exclusively to the evolution of production methods and patterns of living which do not depend on fossil fuels at all, or depend on them only to a very slight extent. These and many other things we should be doing if we treated fossil fuels as capital and not as income. And we do not do any of them, but the exact contrary of every one of them. We are not in the least concerned with conservation, we are maximizing instead of minimizing the current rates of use, and far from being interested in studying the possibilities of alternative methods of production and patterns of living, so as to get off the collision course on which we are moving with ever increasing speed, we happily talk of unlimited progress along the beaten track of education for leisure in rich countries and of the transfer of technology to the poor countries. The liquidation of these capital assets is proceeding so rapidly that even in the allegedly richest countries in the world, for example, in the United States of America, there are many worried people right up to the White House calling for the massive conversion of coal into oil and gas, demanding ever more gigantic efforts to search for and exploit the remaining measures of the earth. Okay, that's how Schmacher tried to look at a variety of things that you can look backwards, like the Second World War, and what has the Second World War given to humankind. And of course, since then fuel consumption has trebled, but the trebling involved an increase of less than 5,000 million tons of coal equivalent, and now we are calmly talking about an increase 3 times as large. People very often ask, can it be done? And the answer comes back for Schmacher, it must be done and therefore it shall be done. One might say that's how he also tried to bring about a critique of Galbraith, John Kenneth Galbraith, who said that a purely agricultural country, a purely agricultural economy is poor even in its agriculture. Okay, that it is a case of the blind leading the blind. But why caste aspersions? The question itself is wrong-headed because it carries the implicit assumption that we are dealing with income and not with capital. Okay? Nature has been treated as natural resources like fossil fuels are considered income items, not capital items. What is so special about the future possibilities of conserving these natural resources as capital items? All these questions and answers are seen to be absurd the moment we realize that we are dealing with capital and not with income. Fossil fuels are not made by individuals, they cannot be recycled. Once they are gone forever. But what it will be asked about the income fuels? Yes, indeed, what about them? Currently, they contribute, reckoned in calories, less than 4% of the world total in the, in the foreseeable future. They will have to contribute 70, 80, 90%. To do something on a small scale is one thing, and to do on a gigantic scale is quite another. And to make an impact on the world fuel problem, contributions have to be truly gigantic. Fossil fuels are merely a part of the natural capital, which we steadfastly insist on treating as expendable as if it were income, and by no means the most important part. If we squander our fossil fuels, we threaten civilization, but if we squander the capital represented by living nature around us, then we threaten life itself. People are waking up to this threat and they demand that pollution must stop. They think of pollution as a rather nasty habit indulged in by careless or greedy people who, as it were, throw their rubbish over the fence into the neighbor's garden. A more civilized behavior, they realize, would incur some extra cost, and therefore we need a faster rate of economic growth to be able to pay for it. From now on, they say we should use at least some of the fruits of our ever-increasing productivity to improve the quality of life and not merely to increase the quantity of consumption. Now, there is a difference between quality of life on the one hand and quantity of consumption on the other. All this is fair enough, but it touches only the outer fringe of the problem. To get to the crux of the matter, we do well to ask why it is that all these items, I mean pollution, environment, ecology and so on, have so suddenly come into prominence. After all, we have had an industrial system for quite some time, yet only 5 or 10 years, I mean if you look at last, even not even 5-10 years, but last 40-50 years ago, these words were virtually unknown. Is this a sudden fad, a silly fashion, or perhaps a sudden failure of nerve? The explanation is not difficult to find. As with fossil fuels, we have indeed been living on the capital of living nature for some time, but at a fairly modest rate. It is only since the end of the Second World War that we have succeeded in increasing this rate to alarming proportions. Precisely because of the way we have witnessed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. In comparison with what is going on now and what has been going on progressively during the last 70-80 years, all the industrial activities of humankind up to and including the Second World War as nothing. Okay. The next 50 years or so or 40 years or so are likely to see maybe more industrial production with more threats of pollution and so on, taking the world as a whole, than all of mankind accomplished up to 1945, I mean the end of the Second World War. In other words, there has been a unique quantitative jump in industrial production and more quantitative jumps, more quantitative leaps in the context of pollution and so on. Partly as a cause also as an effect, there has also been a unique qualitative jump. Our scientists and technologists have learned to compound substances unknown to nature. Against many of them, nature is virtually defenseless. There are no natural agents to attack and break them down. It is as if aborigines were suddenly attacked with machine gun fire. Their own bows and arrows are of no avail. These substances unknown to nature owe their almost magical effectiveness precisely to nature's defenselessness, and that accounts also for their dangerous ecological impact. It is only in the last 40-50 years or so that they have made their appearance in bulk. Because they have no natural enemies, they tend to accumulate, and the long term consequences of this accumulation are in many cases known to be extremely dangerous and in other cases totally unpredictable. Putting it succinctly, the changes of the last 70-80 years, both in the quantity and in the quality of individuals, I mean human beings' industrial processes, have produced an entirely new situation, a situation resulting not from our failures but from what we thought were our greatest successes. And this has come so suddenly that we hardly noticed the fact that we were very rapidly using up a certain kind of irreplaceable capital asset, namely the tolerance margins, okay, which benign nature always provides. When the question of income fuels comes up, with which Schmacher was very much engaged in, that no one was suggesting that the worldwide industrial system perhaps would be sustained primarily by water or wind power. No, perhaps no. I mean, everyone knew that they were moving rapidly into the nuclear age after Hiroshima and Nagasaki incidents, and of course, if you look at this phase that this has been the story for quite some time, for over 70-80 years, and yet the contribution of nuclear energy to human beings' total fuel and energy requirements is still minute. For example, in 1970, it amounted to 2.7% in Britain, 0.6% in the entire European community, and 0.3% in the United States. Perhaps the proposition that Schmacher wanted to make, was to replace thousands of millions of tons of fossil fuels every year by nuclear energy, which means to solve the problem of such a monstrous magnitude that will not only be the only one to have a queasy feeling. It implies solving one problem by shifting it to another problem or another sphere there to create an infinitely bigger problem. Okay? That future scientists and technologists will be able to devise safety rules and precautions of such perfection that the using, transporting, processing and storing radioactive materials in ever increasing quantities will be made entirely safe. Also that it will be the task of politicians and social scientists to create a world society in which wars and civil disturbances can never happen. But if you look at this, all of us, we are engaged in such wars and civil disturbances. Again, it is a proposition to solve one problem simply by shifting it to another sphere, the sphere of everyday human behavior, and this takes us to the third category of natural capital, which we are recklessly squandering because we treat it as if it were income, as if it were something we had made ourselves and could easily replace out of our much wanted and rapidly rising productivity. Okay? And it is evident that our current methods of production are already eating into the very substance of industrial human beings. To many people, this is not at all evident. Now that we have solved the problem of production, they say, have we ever had it so good? Are we not better fed, better clothed and better housed than ever before? And also better educated? Of course we are. How Schmacher responds that of course we are better educated, better clothed, better fed, better housed and so on, but by no means all of us, both not only in poor countries but also in rich countries. But this does not mean what Schmacher meant by substance. The substance of individuals cannot be measured by gross national product, according to Schmacher. Perhaps this term substance is extremely important in Schmacher's work, that perhaps it can never be measured at all except for certain symptoms of loss. Nevertheless, this is not the place, if you look at substance, then you cannot measure substance in terms of statistical measures. Okay? The illusion that the problem of production has been solved is mainly due to our inability to recognize that the modern industrial system, with all its intellectual sophistication, consumes the very basis on which it has been erected. To use the language of the economist, it lives on irreplaceable capital which it cheerfully treats as income, how Schmacher devised or specified three categories of such capital, namely fossil fuels, 1, 2, the tolerance margins of one is fossil fuels, 1, okay, then a tolerance margins of nature, 2, and thirdly the human substance. Okay, even if some, even if one may disagree with Schmacher's arguments, but but one cannot ignore these three categories of capital, namely fossil fuels, the tolerance margins of nature, and the human substance. And when you look at this, that the problem of production is still there. Okay, that Schmacher argues that nature's resistance to pollution is also limited. He concludes that government's efforts must be concentrated on sustainable development because relatively minor improvements, for example, technology transfer to the third world, would not solve the underlying problem of unsustainable economy. Schmacher's philosophy is one of enoughness, appreciating both human needs, limitations and appropriate use of technology, which grows out of his study of village-based economics, which he later termed Buddhist economics. Schmacher faults conventional economic thinking for failing to consider the most appropriate scale for an activity. That's how he tried to bring about a critique of the notion that no, bigger is better, growth is good, and so on. That's how he interrogates, he questions the appropriateness of using mass production in developing countries, promoting instead production by the masses. Okay, and Schmacher was one of the first economists to interrogate the appropriateness of using gross national product to measure human well-being, emphasizing that the aim ought to be obtain the maximum amount of well-being with the minimum amount of consumption. Okay, that's how if you look at, for example, in agriculture and horticulture, we can interest ourselves in the perfection of production methods which are biologically sound, build up soil fertility and produce health, beauty and permanence. And productivity will then look after itself. In industry, we can interest ourselves in the evolution of small scale technology, a relatively non-violent technology with a human face, so that people have a chance to enjoy themselves while they are working, instead of working solely for their pay packet and hoping usually forlornly for enjoyment solely during their leisure time. And in industry again, and surely industry is the pace setter of modern life, and we can interest ourselves in new forms of partnership between management and individuals, or management and workers, even forms of common ownership. Okay, that's why the what we are going to discuss now, that from the problem of production to the angle of peace and permanence. Okay, that the way now the individual has acquired the physical means of self-obliteration, the question of peace obviously looms larger than ever before in human history. But how could peace be built without some assurance of permanence with regard to our economic life? The dominant modern belief is that the soundest foundation of peace would be universal prosperity. One may look in vain for historical evidence that the rich have regularly been more peaceful than the poor, but then it can be argued that they have never felt secure against the poor, that their aggressiveness stemmed from fear, and that the situation would be quite different if everybody were rich. Why should a rich individual go to war? They have nothing to do or nothing to gain. Are not the poor, the exploited, the oppressed most likely to do so, as they have nothing to lose but their chains? They have a world to win. The road to peace, it is argued, is to follow the road to riches. The dominant modern belief has an almost irresistible attraction, as it suggests that the faster you get one desirable thing, the more securely do you attain another. It is doubly attractive because it completely bypasses the whole question of ethics. There is no need for renunciation or sacrifice, on the contrary. And we have science and technology to help us along the road to peace and plenty, peace and abundance. And all that is needed is that we should not behave stupidly, irrationally, cutting into our own flesh. The message to the poor and discontented is that they must not impatiently upset or kill the goose that will assuredly in due course lay golden eggs also for them. And the message to the rich is that they must be intelligent enough from time to time to help the poor, because this is the way by which they will become richer still. Okay, that's how, that is the conventional notion. Okay, and that's how Schmacher attacked the dominant modern belief that the soundest foundation of peace would be universal prosperity. Okay, and he tried to refer to Gandhi's notion that when particularly Gandhi used to talk disparagingly of dreaming of systems so perfect that no one would need to be good, but it is not precisely this dream which we can implement in reality with our marvelous powers of science and technology. Why ask for virtues which individuals may never acquire when scientific rationality and technological competence are all that is needed? Instead of listening to Gandhi, are we not more inclined to listen to one of the most influential economists of the 20th century, namely John Maynard Keynes? In the 1930s, from 1929 to 1933, during the Great Depression, the world was raving after being, the world was going through horrendous crimes and casualties perpetrated by the war situation, by the Great Depression. National economies of most of the countries were shattered. International trade touched the lowest ebb, and during the worldwide during such economic depression, Keynes felt moved to speculate on the economic possibilities for our future, and concluded that the day might not be well that far off when everybody would be rich. We shall then, Keynes said, that once more value ends above means and prefer the good to the useful. But he warned us also that the time for all this is not yet. For at least another 100 years or so, we must pretend to ourselves and to everyone that fair is foul and foul is fair, for foul is useful and fair is not. Avarice and money lending and precaution must be our gods for a little longer still, as his allegiance towards bourgeois economics, and for only they can lead us out of our tunnel of economic necessity into daylight. This was written in 1936 in the General Theory of Employment and Interest and Money, and since then, of course, things have speeded up considerably. Maybe we do not have to wait for another 100 years until universal plenty, universal abundance would be attained. In any case, the Keynesian message is clear and enough that when he warned that ethical considerations are not merely irrelevant, they are an actual hindrance. And that's why he said foul is useful and fair is not. And the time for fairness is not yet. The road to heaven is paved for with bad intentions. Okay, that's why if you look at this the proposition that Schmacher made may be divided into three parts. One, that universal prosperity is possible. Two, that its attainment is, the attainment of universal prosperity is possible on the basis of what? On the basis of the materialist philosophy of enrich yourselves. And then he goes back to Marx. Okay, and and thirdly, that this is the road to peace. The question with which to start Schmacher's investigation is obviously this: is there enough to go around? Immediately we encounter a serious difficulty. What is enough? Who can tell us that what is enough? Certainly not the economist who pursues economic growth as the highest of all values, and therefore has no concept of enough. There are poor societies which have too little, but where is the rich society that says, halt, we have enough? There is none. Perhaps we can forget about enough and content ourselves with exploring the growth of demand upon the world's resources, which arises when everybody simply strives hard to have more. As we cannot study all resources, Schmacher tried to propose to focus attention on one type of resource which is in a somewhat central position, that is fuel. And more prosperity means a greater use of fuel. There can be no doubt about that. At present, the prosperity gap between the poor of this world and the rich of this world is very wide indeed. And this is clearly shown in their respective fuel consumption. Okay, that's how he looked at the inequality which persists between rich and poor countries so far as development studies in general is concerned and sociology of development in particular is concerned. Okay, if you look at what do we need from our scientists, from our technologists and so on, what Schmacher tried to look at, for example, nuclear energy. Some people say that the world's resources of relatively concentrated uranium are insufficient to sustain a really large nuclear program, large enough to have a significant impact on the world fuel situation, where we have to reckon with thousands of millions, not simply with millions of tons of coal equivalent. But assume that these people are wrong, enough uranium will be found, it will be gathered together with the remotest corners of the earth, brought into the main centers of populations and made highly radioactive. It is hard to imagine a greater biological threat, not to mention the political danger that someone might use a tiny bit of this terrible substance for purposes not altogether peaceful. Okay, and in this sense, it's important to look at the economics of permanence, that the cultivation and expansion of needs is the antithesis of wisdom. It is also the antithesis of freedom and peace. Every increase of needs tends to increase one's dependence on outside forces over which one cannot have control, and therefore increases existential fear. Only by a reduction of needs can one promote a genuine reduction in those tensions which are the ultimate causes of strife and war. What is then the economics of permanence? Okay, this is important. Okay, the economics of permanence implies a profound reorientation of science and technology, which have to open the doors to wisdom and in fact have to incorporate wisdom into their very structure. And scientific and technological solutions which poison the environment or degrade the social structure and individuals themselves are of no benefit, no matter how brilliantly conceived or how great their superficial attraction. Ever bigger machines entailing ever bigger concentrations of economic power and exerting ever greater violence against the environment do not represent progress. They are a denial of wisdom, and wisdom demands a new orientation of science and technology towards the organic, the gentle, or the non-violent, and the elegant and beautiful. Peace, as has often been said, is indivisible. How then could peace be built on a foundation of reckless science and violent technology? We must look for a revolution in technology to give us inventions and machines which reverse the destruction trends now threatening us all. What is it that we really need from the scientists and technologists? Schmacher answered this way, that perhaps we need methods and equipments which are cheap enough so that they are accessible to virtually everyone, suitable for small scale application, and must be compatible with individuals' need for creativity. And out of these three characteristics is born non-violence and the relationship of individual with nature that guarantees permanence. If only one of these three is neglected, then things are bound to go wrong. Okay? I mean, methods and machines cheap enough to be accessible to virtually everyone, why should we assume that our scientists and technologists are unable to develop them? This was a primary concern for Gandhi, for example. What Gandhi once, in selected writings and speeches, once Gandhi said that I want to dump millions of our land to be healthy and happy, and I want them to grow spiritually. If we feel the need of machines, we certainly will have them. Every machine that helps every individual has a place, but there should be no place for machines that concentrate power in a few hands and turn the masses into mere machine minders, but indeed they do not make them unemployed. Suppose it becomes the unacknowledged purpose of inventors and engineers to provide ordinary people with the means of doing profitable and intrinsically significant work of helping men and women to achieve independence or freedom from their owners of means of production, so that they may become their own employers and or members of a self-governing cooperative group working for substance and a local market, then this differently oriented technological progress would result in a progressive decentralization of population, of political and economic power. Other advantages would be a more humanly satisfying life for more people, a greater measure of genuine self-governing democracy, and a blessed freedom from the silly of pernicious adult education provided by the mass producers and consumer goods through the medium of advertisements. If methods and machines, okay, if methods and equipment, methods and machines are to be cheap enough to be generally accessible, this implies that their cost must stand in some definable relationship to the level of incomes in the society, in our economy, in our culture, in our polity, and so on, in which they are to be used. The upper limit of the average amount of capital investment per workplace is probably given by the annual earnings of an able and ambitious industrial worker. The second requirement is suitability of small scale application. I mean, on the problem of scale, what Professor Leopold Kohr suggested, Schmacher's mentor, suggested that, who has written brilliantly and convincingly, its relevance to the economics of permanence is obvious. Small scale operations, no matter how numerous, are always less likely to be harmful to the natural environment than large scale ones, simply because their individual force is small in relation to the recuperative forces of nature. There is wisdom in smallness, if only on account of the smallness and patchiness of human knowledge, which relies on experiment far more than on understanding. The greatest danger invariably arises from the ruthless application on a vast scale of partial knowledge, such as we are currently witnessing in the application of nuclear energy, of the new chemistry of in agriculture, maybe BT seeds, genetically modified organisms and so on, and of transportation technologies and countless other things. Although even small communities are sometimes guilty of causing serious erosion, generally as a result of ignorance, and this is trifling in comparison with the devastations caused by gigantic groups motivated by greed, envy, and the lust for power. It is moreover obvious that human beings organized in small units will take better care of their bit of land or other natural resources than anonymous companies or megalomaniac governments which pretend to themselves that the whole universe is their legitimate quarry. The third requirement is perhaps the most important of all, that it must be, that methods and equipment must be or should be so as to leave ample room for human creativity. What becomes of an individual if the process of production takes away from work any hint of humanity, making it a merely mechanical activity? And so bodily labor, which even after original sin was decreed by providence for the good of individual's body and soul, is in many instances changed into an instrument of perversion far from the factory. Dead matter goes out improved, whereas individuals there are corrupt and degraded. Again, the subject is so large. It's one must look into. There is a need for a proper philosophy at work, which understands work not as that which it has indeed income an inhuman core as soon as possible to be abolished by automation, but as something decreed by providence for the good of human beings, body and soul. Next to the family, it is work and the relationships established by work that are true and foundations of society. If the foundations are unsound, how could society be sound? And if society is sick, how could it fail to be a danger to peace? War is a judgment, if you look at that, overtakes societies when they have been living upon ideas that conflict too violently with the laws governing the universe. Okay? Economically, our wrong living consists primarily in systematically cultivating greed and envy, and thus building up a vast array of totally unwarrantable wants. It is a sin of greed that has delivered us over into the power of the machine. If greed were not the master of modern human beings, modern individuals, ably assisted by envy, how could it be that the frenzy of economism, economic reductionism, not abate as higher standards of living are attained, and that it is precisely the richest economies which pursue their economic advantage with the greatest ruthlessness? Okay, how could we explain the almost universal refusal on the part of the rulers of the rich societies, rich economies, whether organized along private enterprise or collective enterprise lines, to work towards the humanization of work. It is only necessary to assert that something would reduce the standard of living and every debate is instantly closed. That soul destroying, meaningless, mechanical, monotonous, moronic work is an insult to human nature which must necessarily and inevitably produce either escapism or aggression, and that no amount of bread and circuses can compensate for the damage done. And these are facts which are neither denied nor acknowledged but are met with an unbreakable conspiracy of silence, because to deny them would be too obviously absurd, and to acknowledge them would condemn the central preoccupation of modern society as a crime against humanity. Thus, the neglect, indeed the rejection of wisdom has gone so far that most of our intellectuals have not even the faintest idea what the term could mean, as a consequence of which they always tend to try and cure a disease by intensifying its causes. The disease having been caused by following cleverness to displace wisdom, no amount of clever research is likely to produce a cure. But what is wisdom? Where can it be found? How we come to the crux of the matter? It can be read about in numerous publications, but it can be found only inside oneself. To be able to find it, one has to first liberate oneself from such masters as greed and envy. The stillness following liberation, even if only momentary, produces the insights of wisdom which are obtainable in no other way. They enable us to see the hollowness and fundamental unsatisfactoriness of a life devoted primarily to the pursuit of material needs, to the neglect of the spiritual. Such a life necessarily sets individual against individual, nation against nation, region against region, religion against religion, caste against caste, and so on, because individuals' needs are infinite and infinitude can be achieved only in the spiritual realm, never in the material realm. That's what Schmacher argues in contradiction with Marxist materialist philosophy. Individuals assuredly need to rise above this humdrum world. Wisdom shows them the way to do it, and without wisdom they are driven to build up a monster economy which destroys the world and to seek fantastic satisfactions like landing an individual on the moon. Instead of overcoming the world by moving towards saintliness, they try to overcome it by gaining preeminence in wealth, power, science, and indeed any imaginable sport. These are the real causes of war, and it's I mean to try to lay the foundations of peace without removing them first. It is doubly dangerous to build. I mean, it is if you look at how to build peace on economic foundations, which in turn rest on the systematic cultivation of greed and envy, the very forces which drive individuals into conflict. How could we even begin to disarm greed and envy? Perhaps by being much less greedy and envious ourselves, perhaps by resisting the temptation of letting our luxuries become needs, and perhaps by even scrutinizing our needs to see if they cannot be simplified and reduced. If we do not have the strength to do any of this, could we perhaps stop applauding the type of economic progress which palpably lacks the basis of permanence, and give that modest support we can to those who, unafraid of being denounced as cranks, work for non-violence as conservationists, ecologists, environmentalists, protectors of wildlife, promoters of organic agriculture, distributists, cottage producers, protectors of indigenous communities, and so on and so forth. An ounce of practice is generally worth more than a ton of theory. That's what Schmacher argues. it would need many ounces, of course, nevertheless, to lay the economic foundations of peace. Where can one find the strength to go on working against such obviously appalling odds? What is more, where can one find the strength to overcome the violence of greed, envy, hate, hatred and lust within oneself? And then Schmacher goes back to Gandhi again, that when Gandhi said there must be recognition of the existence of the soul apart from the body and of its permanent nature, and this recognition must amount to a living faith, and in the last resort, non-violence does not avail those who do not possess a living faith in the God of love. Okay, not God of hatred, but God of love. Okay, then what we have discussed in this lecture, we have discussed Schmacher's reflections on a small is beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered, in terms of the problem of production, peace and permanence, and the role of economics. I mean, he was trying to look at Buddhist economics, he was trying to look at Gandhi for the solution by bringing about a critique of not simply Marx but also Keynes. And we have come to the closure of the 11th week of this massive open online course on Sociology of Development. And in the next week, in the 12th week, I mean the last week, we are going to discuss toward a history of needs, throwing the baby out with the bathwater by Ivan Illich, and then we will discuss paradigms lost, paradigms regained, development studies in the 21st century by Franz J. Surman. Thank you.